This is part 2 of Petaca. The reason I'm continuing this, I guess I'm a little off my theme, but New Mexico, and especially Petaca, was like entering a whole different world. Now remember, I had been living in New York City, and that's a different world in itself. But here in Petaca, we were talking about a town, I would say, still in the 18th century. But not only that, it was still the Old West. I'm not kidding. It was the Old West. And the town of Petaca essentially was lawless. Why I was there, a gentleman who lived in the town, I knew him, killed a man because he was messing around with his wife. And nothing ever happened about that. Also, the biggest drug dealers lived in the town. Now, one thing you have to know about this area, New Mexico, it's very ancestral, meaning all of them are related. And what happens with the drug dealers, for example, the FBI was the one who raided the town and looking for drugs. And before the FBI entered the town, all the drug dealers disappeared. And when they did raid the town, they all went after the Anglos, the hippies. Of course, all of them had drugs, marijuana, and they grew it, they smoked it, nothing much heavier than that. And I don't remember anybody going to jail over it, but, maybe they got the warning too and hid everything right away. But the reason why they got the warning, the sheriff would let them know about the raid. Well, of course, the sheriff was the cousin, Everybody in the area were related and were cousins. So the Anglos sort of were on the wrong side because they weren't related to anybody, but everybody there was related. There was another group that lived in Petaca, some and outside of Petaca. They called themselves the Cowboys, and literally they were cowboys. They dressed up in the cowboy dress, rode horses fearlessly around the area, cutting the fences, riding through any place they want to go, robbing and stealing, and they even had shootouts, and usually among themselves or an opposing gang. And they killed several of those members. I don't remember anybody being arrested and going to jail. And so these cowboys, you have to understand, they weren't cowboys. They were pretend cowboys. They were all from Brooklyn. They probably was a member of a gang in Brooklyn that got too hot in New York and came west to New Mexico, where it was still the Wild West. And I'm not kidding about that. It was a pretty wild place. Another incident that happened in the town was that one of the members of the community, one of the relatives, you might say, had decided to become a farmer. At that time, nobody was really farming. They were just getting their welfare checks and going on, but he wanted to become a farmer. And he started farming. Well, little towns and ancestral little towns, the other members of the community were jealous, or decided they didn't want that type of precedence in their community. And so they shot at him in his house. It wasn't safe to be in the house because they would shoot at him. They burned his barn down and destroyed all his equipment. As I said, it was the Wild West. It was completely lawless. And, everybody did more or less what they wanted to do. I had one incident with the sheriff. I thought was very interesting. The kids, you had to watch out for the kids. If you left your house unattended for any reason, they would break in and steal anything that you had. And so this happened to me, and I really got tired of it, because you can never leave your house because one of the kids would break in and steal whatever you got. So I threatened one of the kids, just a threat. I said, I got a shotgun and I'll blow your head off if you come in my house again. Well, it was just an empty threat. I wouldn't blow anybody's head off or anything like that, but I wanted to scare him. So one night at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a heavy knock at my door, and I went to answer it, and there was the sheriff with his gun drawn, threatening me with his gun, and told him, "Don't you dare threaten my relative. Don't you know what he didn't say that? Don't you dare threaten the children in town, or I'll blow your fucking brains out." Anyhow, with the kids going around with the guns and chasing everybody out of town and burning their houses down and stuff like that. It's not only that; it was the whole area. Nearby there was a housing development. The guy was building houses to sell. Of course, he was a gringo. He was not a Spanish. And so all of a sudden, those houses caught fire and they were all burned down. Anyhow, it was an interesting experience to live in Petaca and to live in New Mexico, especially that part of Mexico, because it was completely lawless. And luckily, I think because of what I did in the town and one thing and another, they left me alone. And I never had any problem. The first guy they went after in town to chase out was a very nice guy. He tried to work with the community. He was one of those, do-gooders, one of those community activist type. He was actually a rabbi. And anyhow, he seemed to be the first one the kids went after, chasing him out of town. It was like a terrible experience to him. He was really traumatized. And actually what happened when I was in Santa Fe, I hired him to work with me because he didn't have any income, and now his house is destroyed. And he didn't have any money, any food, or anything else like that, So it was the West. And another interesting thing, that this was, a lot of the people were married to Apaches. They were, Mexican or not Spanish, Indian combination. And so there was a lot of empathy for the Apache Indians. In fact, in that part of Mexico and New Mexico, there was many different tribes of Indians that lived there. They like to be called Native Americans, and I don't object to that. There were several tribes, and it was very interesting. I used to go to their powwows where they do their dances and things like that. But one of the most interesting was a tribe in Taos. Taos was a small town across the Rio Grande from where I was. And the Taos Indians were still living, not like the 18th century. They were still living like they did before the white man came. Before, they were still fighting the Indian wars. Well, they weren't warriors. They weren't doing that. It's just they decided that they didn't want to have anything to do with the American lifestyle, with the white man's lifestyle. And so they still lived in this community, no electricity, no gas, no running water, none of the modern conveniences. They still lived like they did before the white man ever came. And they were determined to keep that way because to them they said the white man's crazy and someday they will come to us to find out how to live. Well, I don't doubt that that would probably happen when I look at the way we're destroying the world. But it was interesting to meet this group of people and go and visit them on in their towns. And there was many stories like that in New Mexico. It's just a whole different world. And I loved it. I loved it because it wasn't like America. It was more or less like Spain, but more than that, it was the Old West, and it hadn't changed since the Old West was first being settled. So anyhow, this is a sort of a side note. I thought I'd let you hear about that. I'll see you. Comments are appreciated.